Hey everyone, Pugs here, and welcome back to yet another big ol' season overview. Today I'm covering Season 9 of SpongeBob SquarePants. For all my returning viewers, thank you for tuning in once more. You already know what's about to go down. For anyone who's watching one of these overviews for the first time, welcome to the channel and to my reviews. Let me give you a brief rundown on how these overviews work. So, I'm going to go on that lovely tier-making website, tiermaker.com, and create a tier list of all the episodes in Season 9 of SpongeBob SquarePants. I'll talk a bit about each episode as I go, generally summarizing the proper review of the episode that is already uploaded onto this channel. So what that means is that if you're more interested in hearing what I've got to say about a specific episode, then check out its corresponding review. And then, if you're curious about what exactly goes into each tier or rating that I'm using, then I'd suggest checking out my Season 1 overview, where I did go into this for a few minutes. That's linked in the description of this video as per usual. And then lastly, once I'm finished with the tier list, I'll be talking about my average episode rating for the season, and then getting into what is essentially a retrospective on Season 9. Sound good? I sure hope so, because that's what we're doing. But right before I do that, y'all already know I gotta give that big, huge, enormous really, thank you to everyone who has been supporting the channel during my reviews of this season. We actually hit 4,000 subscribers during this time, which is fucking awesome, so I'm super excited about that. And just being able to come back here and talk about the show I love has been a big source of, frankly, self-care for me, which is so needed considering how difficult life outside of the channel has been. So seriously, thanks guys. And now, let me put the sappiness away, as it's time to dive right into the tier list for Season 9. Alright. Here we are back yet again on tiermaker.com. Y'all already know how we get down over here, no need to get too deep into it. I'll just be starting with the best episodes of the season and ending with the worst. Let's get started with the top 5. The beginning of the top 5 is, as you'd expect, my favorite episode of the season. And what you might not expect is what that episode ended up being, and that is Tudor Sauce, which had come in with the score of 9.6 out of 10. This episode may be unremarkable for many, but for me it was one of the best. This episode was just about made for me, given how it's one of the most overt episodes about Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob's quasi-father-son relationships to date. And that's not the only reason I love this episode, but it's certainly one of the big ones. The main reason that this episode has been given such a high score is because it's fucking hilarious. Like, every joke hits like a truck, they're so good. And it's exactly my kind of humor too, that witty and dry kind, although there's plenty of slapstick and visual gags to be found. I also really love how this episode seamlessly blends two different running plot lines in this show, the Krusty Krab plot and the SpongeBob trying to get his license plot. It's rather impressive, and so it's certainly earned its spot as my favorite of the season. For number 2 on the top 5, that honor is going to go to another surprise entry, The Sewers of Bikini Bottom, which had come in with a score of 9.5 out of 10. I really, truly believe that The Sewers of Bikini Bottom is a hilarious episode. That's really all there is to it. Or, I guess there is some more. Like, the SpongeBob and Squidward dynamic in this episode is one of the many examples of them at their best, and Mr. Krabs also has an excellent appearance in this episode, bouncing off of the one-off characters he's around quite nicely. I also just think it's neat that this episode kinda has two plots going on that interact with each other but never quite intersect, to the point where the characters of each plot are informed about the actions of the characters of the other plot, and this reminds me a lot of Tunnel of Glove. Moving right along to number 3 of the top 5, that's going to be, unsurprisingly to me at least, Sharks vs. Pods. This episode came in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. Sharks vs. Pods has been an episode that has stood out for me ever since it premiered a decade ago. This episode is really a good time for me. The animation is excellent, and I love the visual design of it, just with all the backgrounds we get in this episode, as well as the character designs. And the best part of all of it is the plot, as SpongeBob's misunderstanding of who the sharks are really brings that melodrama that I love to see, especially when SpongeBob thinks the sharks have kidnapped Gary, and the twist that the sharks are actually a dance crew is great and unexpected, not to mention leads to an excellent ending sequence with the dance battle. As for number 4 in the top 5, that's going to be another predictable one, Patrick the Game, which had also come in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. I just really love this episode. It's fucking hilarious. I could start and end with that, honestly. but watching Patrick go about trying to invent a game until he straight up Frankensteins it is great. I love it. And the cast of characters in this episode, SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy, is great. Like, I'm really happy Sandy was included here, and she adds a lot to the dynamic. And then for the final episode of the top 5, that's going to be the only episode from Season 9A to make it in, Don't Look Now, which I had also given a 9.4 out of 10. If you've been watching this channel for long enough, you'd know I love the Halloween-themed episodes of this show, so it should come as no surprise that this episode is no exception. This is just a classic Conch Street Trio shenanigans kind of episode where Squidward gleefully gets in on the action just so he can get one over on SpongeBob and Patrick. And all of the slapstick that ensues from this is wonderful. This episode has got great jokes all over the place. It's such a good time. Alright, so all in all, there were an astounding 24 episodes that made it into the amazing tier for Season 9, which means we're going to be here for a while. This also means that there must be a shit ton of ties for me to work out, so yay me, right? Let's get to these other 18. 3 other episodes were given that 9.4 out of 10 rating, and the first of these is going to be Eek and Urchin. This is a beautifully simple and hilarious episode that brings to mind the simplicity of Season 1. This episode knows how to bring the humor, and so we just get gag after gag, joke after joke, and they overwhelmingly not just land, but land well. In my opinion, this is a great episode to watch when you're just looking to sit back and feel good because you're laughing so hard. Next up is gonna be Jailbreak. Jailbreak is a really great episode for Plankton specifically. Like, he shines in this episode since he gets a ton of focus here, and we get to see him interact with people outside of his normal episode partners. This episode is also really great at hitting you with those jokes that you didn't even know were coming, which is truly an art form. And then the last episode to receive a score of 9.4 out of 10 was Pineapple Invasion. The most shocking thing about this episode, outside of being behind 2 9A episodes with the same score, is that it's an episode focused on Gary the Snail that doesn't disappoint me. Because if you've been watching this channel for long enough, you'd know that that is an odd and unfortunate trend here. And it's sad that this has been a trend since the show's beginning, but hey, at least I really liked this one. It's funny, and it's fun, and it just does such a good job with what it's going for. Nothing else I can really say about it. Moving on, 3 episodes were given a score of 9.3 out of 10. And to start us off here, we've got Sanctuary. Let's see, Gary being somewhat of a focus, check. SpongeBob being a weird little dude, check. A bit of creepiness factor, check. Well, that's 3 out of 3, what more could I ask for from an episode? Ha, in all seriousness though, I really like how this episode writes SpongeBob. Him being a caricature of a stereotypical crazy cat lady is very entertaining for me, and the way this episode executes this is excellent. There's also so many great jokes in this one, it's definitely a must-watch for the season. Next, we've got the forever iconic Plankton's Pet. I really loved so much about this episode. For one thing, this episode introduces Plankton and Karen's pet amoeba, Spot, who I think is a great addition to this show. And I really love how Plankton was written in this episode. I love that we get to see him outside of trying to steal the formula. I love his dynamic with SpongeBob, which has been a staple of this show since Fun, and I love his interactions with Spot. I had a whole lot to say about the SpongeBob and Plankton dynamic in my actual review of this episode, so if you haven't seen that, I'd highly suggest it. And then last, but certainly not least when it comes to these 9.3 out of 10 episodes, we've got Copy Bob Ditto Pants. This episode has a little less going for it than the other episodes with this score, but that doesn't mean much when it's just a good time. This episode is one of those episodes with a very simple plot, and that works quite well here. The shenanigans that ensue from Plankton creating these SpongeBob clones are just so funny, and I just love SpongeBob becoming friends with his clones so easily, and how easily Plankton's plans end up, or keep being foiled. The surprise dramatic ending was also a treat. Up next, 6 episodes earned themselves a 9.2 out of 10 score. The first of these that I'm putting here on the tier list is Bulletin Board. I adore how Bulletin Board manages to capture the vibes of the modern internet landscape in a way that doesn't feel haughty, the way that many pieces of media with similar commentary can. I especially love how this episode manages to take the internet and SpongeBobify it so as to not date the show, as the creators remain committed to doing. And above all, I just find this episode to be hilarious and enjoyable, benchmarks of any episode in this tier. Following that, we've got Mall Girl Pearl. This episode is an excellent example of all the things I like about Season 9B, with the Easter eggs, the background details, and the focus on a different character for once. It's also just nice to see Pearl have some character in general, since her limited appearances have only allowed for her to be given 1 or 2 character traits up to this point. I just love how fun this episode is, and funny too. And I love how SpongeBob barely even appears in it, something that makes this episode stand out immediately. Up next in these 9.2 out of 10s, we've got What's Eating Patrick. The best thing about What's Eating Patrick is definitely Patrick, which is not something I ever thought I'd say given how frequently he has been the weakest point of an episode for the past, 4 seasons. But like with other episodes in Season 9B specifically, this episode does a great job at making Patrick feel like an actual character again, and therefore actually funny again, although this episode's strong suit isn't the humor, but rather the actual story itself. I really struggled in deciding the placement of this episode versus the next one, and I think what gives this episode the leg up is the focus on Patrick and really doing some good work with his character, a rehab job that the next episode does not take on. And speaking of the next episode, that one is Seance Schmeance, the other Halloween-themed episode of Season 9. I've got lots of love for this episode. I just like I did with Don't Look Now. It's not quite as good as that episode, but it's certainly a good time. I love the vibes of this episode, and the way that SpongeBob straight up does a seance so he can learn the recipe to this old sandwich, and a real highlight for me are the few Mr. Krabs and Patrick interactions in this episode. They really are a cornerstone of the comedy here. But there's also lots of great jokes throughout too. Next up, we've got Lame and Fortune. I had a really good time with this one. It's just one of those really solid episodes where nothing in particular stands out. The plot is interesting. I really like when these underwater characters interact with something familiar from the human world, like in Frankendoodle or Hooky. And then I like all the characters in this episode, from SpongeBob to Mr. Krabs to Plankton to the little bits of Karen and Gary we get as well. Just great dynamics all around. And then lastly, for these 9.2 out of 10s, we've got Evil Spatula. While Evil Spatula may be a basic Plankton plot episode, it's amazing because of how damn funny it is. Definitely helps that this episode feels like an improvement on All That Glitters, in nearly every way as well. But again, this is just a really funny episode. I had a lot of fun watching it. There really isn't all that much for me to say. 3 episodes got a score of 9.1 out of 10. The first of these is going to be Squid Plus One. Squid Plus One is a great Squidward-focused episode. What I really loved about this episode was the way that Squidward interacted with other characters, particularly the mailman and Larry the Lobster, which also, that's another great thing about this episode, it decided to give Squidward and Larry substantial interactions, which has literally never happened before, and is also something I never considered would have happened before, but I'm certainly grateful it did. Next up, we've got the Executive Treatment. The Executive Treatment is a Patrick-focused episode, which would normally make me raise an eyebrow, but what this episode does so well is return to the fundamentals of the character that were the reason why he was so funny in the first place. Mainly that Patrick has an actual motivation for the things he does, and has reactions to things instead of being completely disconnected from reality. That's harsh, but also true. And so this episode works because it's funny and brings Patrick back down to earth. And then for the last episode with a score of 9.1 out of 10, that's gonna be Bumper to Bumper. This is an excellent boating school episode, which honestly, as per usual, I love that we got an explanation for why SpongeBob struggles to pass his boating school test, and it's an explanation that fits quite nicely with everything we've seen from the past 9 seasons. Almost like it was meant to be this way the whole time. And now lastly, there were 4 episodes that I gave a 9 out of 10. Starting these off is gonna be Lost in Bikini Bottom. This was the first episode of Season 9B, in production order at least, and what a beginning it was! This episode really set the tone for the season in terms of visuals and comedy. The set design really sticks out to me in this episode. Downtown Bikini Bottom has never felt so alive, except for in Battle for Bikini Bottom and the Cosmic Shake, I suppose. But anyway, this is just a really strong episode, nothing else to it. Wasn't the funniest episode out there or the most entertaining, but it's certainly nothing to sneeze at. Next, that's gonna be 2 Thumbs Down. 2 Thumbs Down is a great example of this show's penchant for comedic melodrama, and I love that because that's one of my favorite things about this show. And those dramatics, particularly from SpongeBob, are what carry this episode for me. I also really liked the choice to include a song in this episode, since that's not something we see too often these days, and also the song is just really good. Following that is going to be FoodCon Castaways. FoodCon Castaways is simply another very solid episode. The dynamics between the core four really carried this episode, and that's not at all a bad thing because this chemistry gives us plenty of great jokes and just a fun time in general. I also like the plot of this episode, it appeals to me. Nothing particularly special or spectacular here, but that's perfectly fine with me. And then for the very last episode in the amazing tier of Season 9, that's gonna be Pull Up a Barrel. I love a good episode about a story, which is exactly what this episode is. Funnily enough, the funniest jokes in this episode are the ones that happen outside of the actual storytelling, but the story Mr. Krabs tells throughout these 11 minutes is very entertaining and certainly keeps my interest, so I'm never bored watching this episode. Alright then, that was a quite large, amazing tier. Now it's time to move on to the great tier. There were 10 episodes in this tier this time around, so not too shabby at all. The first episode here in the great tier is Company Picnic, which I'd given a score of 8.9 out of 10. This episode is a great showing of the Krusty Krab trio, as I like to call them. I like how this episode actually has a very similar setup to Yeti Crabs, an episode I'll be discussing later, but is still very, very different from that episode. What brings this episode down to this tier rather than the tier above is that there's a few moments where it feels slow and where there's not much to laugh at or be entertained by, but all in all, this is a very solid episode. Next up, 4 episodes were given a score of 8.8 out of 10, because I love giving episodes that same score, apparently. And so the first of these is gonna be Snail Mail. In contrast to most episodes in this tier, I actually think that Snail Mail is a really funny episode, like, as a quality. But there's just something about this episode that precludes it from being in the amazing tier. The problem is that I don't know what that is. There's just a feeling in my gut that tells me it doesn't have the wow factor an amazing tier episode has. I wish I could be more specific than that. But anyways, this episode is just great. Like I said, it's funny, and I like that it's a misunderstandings plot that actually works for once. I also like that Sandy plays a key role here, which doesn't happen very often. Following that, we've got SpongeBob Long Pants. This episode is basically a redone version of To Square Pants or Not to Square Pants, a much better version, to be clear. Where this episode does better is in how it doesn't take itself seriously, but rather leans into silliness and facetious melodrama, my favorite. And watching SpongeBob's ego get a bit ahead of itself can often be a treat when done well, and this episode pulls it off just fine. What brings this episode down to this tier rather than the one above is the lack of really good jokes. It's not a particularly funny episode, even if it is an enjoyable one. After that is going to be License to Milkshake. License to Milkshake has the exact kind of absurdist plot I love to see out of this show, like the innate hilarity of making milkshake crafting such a serious art in Bikini Bottom, serious enough to warrant a military-style boot camp, is great. I also like that this episode's guest character, like, quite a bit. The thing that held this episode back from being in the amazing tier was its comedy. It just didn't quite get there. And then lastly, for these 8.8 out of 10s, we've got Safe Deposit Crabs. This was a good Mr. Krabs episode that really helped to set the stage for later SpongeBob Light episodes. Mr. Krabs is just really funny here. I also really enjoyed the B-plot in this episode with SpongeBob and Patrick trying to break into the bank. I didn't love this episode, hence it being in this tier and not the former, but I still really liked it. Moving on, the next episode in this tier is going to be Squirrel Record, which I have given a score of 8.7 out of 10. An enjoyable episode all about Sandy trying to break all sorts of wacky records. Not really much for me to say about this episode other than I really had a good time watching it. Not the funniest episode ever, but surprisingly heartwarming at times. Next up, that's gonna be Larry's Gym, which came in with a score of 8.5 out of 10. What I love most about Larry's Gym is the fact that it centers on Larry the Lobster, a secondary character who rarely receives focus at all, and never in this way. This episode is a great example of how Season 9B started to expand and develop the world of Bikini Bottom, something I plan to talk about at length in the season discussion. But anyway, I really like how this episode utilizes Larry. Like, I think making him someone who actually doesn't care much for most of the main cast of the show is hilarious. Though it's funny I say hilarious here because that is what this episode is not, hence it being in this tier. Following that, we've got Mutiny on the Krusty, which I gave a score of 8.4 out of 10. Mutiny on the Krusty was a pretty good episode that had a lot of great jokes, and a pretty different plot as far as Bikini Bottomites actually disliking Mr. Krabs for once goes. However, as much as I like the Bikini Bottomites standing up for themselves a little bit, they also are so completely useless in this episode, which is certainly on purpose, but that can also be a bit frustrating depending on my headspace, so had to take a few points off for that. Next up, we've got Extreme Spots, which came in with a 8.1 out of 10 score. A fun, relatively action-packed episode that pleasantly surprised me by having the Drastic Radicals actually give SpongeBob and Patrick a chance to join their group, and I really love how the mundane was made extreme, like in the scene with the pillow fighting, and there's something heartwarming in how jellyfishing was seen as the most extreme sport of all. And then for the final episode of this tier, that's gonna be Married to Money, which came in with a score of 8 out of 10. Like a lot of the episodes in this tier, the biggest issue I had with Married to Money was the fact that it wasn't really funny. What makes this episode so low is the fact that there were also times I grew nearly bored with it. But in general, I thought this was an enjoyable episode with an interesting plot, especially because although it's played for laughs, Mr. Krabs' loneliness is a rather serious yet engaging topic to center an episode around. Moving right along down to the yellow tier here, I'm going to talk about the 6 episodes that made up the good tier this time around. The episode starting us off here is The Fishbowl, which came in with a score of 7.9 out of 10. More than anything, The Fishbowl tested my patience as a former psychology major. But in all seriousness, the fact that this episode is about psychology really interested me, and it's this and the Sandy-centric nature of this episode that really draw me in. Unfortunately, the rest of the episode doesn't quite come up to par, especially not when Sandy starts her experiment with SpongeBob and Patrick ends up being a huge jackass. Especially considering how much rehabilitative work Season 9B had been doing with Patrick up to this point, this was a very disappointing turn. But the end of the episode does somewhat save it a little bit, which is why this episode ends up being so high on this tier. Next up, we've got Yeti Crabs, which came in with a score of 7.6 out of 10. This is the episode I mentioned earlier while discussing Company Picnic. This was an episode that I surprisingly enjoyed, because I really can't say that I was expecting to like this one, and that's largely because the middle of the episode was a bit subpar, just kinda dull and not many great jokes. But the beginning and ending of this episode were great. The dynamic between Mr. Krabs and Squidward with the extra element of SpongeBob really carried this episode, and I do so love an episode with the Krusty Crew shenanigans when business is slow. The next episode also had a score of 7.6 out of 10, and that was Patrick Man. This is a fun, silly little episode where Patrick acts as a superhero. In a way, it almost feels like a test run for the Mermaid Pants type stuff we'll be getting in the future, even though I know that these 2 episodes are not related in that way, like, at all. This episode suffered from a lot of the same problems of, like, early Season 9 episodes did, which is that while it was a lot of fun, it just wasn't very funny and didn't leave much of a lasting impression. Moving right along, we've got an episode placement that might ruffle some feathers, and that's because this is Goodbye Krabby Patty, which I'd given a score of 7.5 out of 10. Goodbye Krabby Patty is the 200th episode of this show, and I think it makes for a decent celebration of that milestone. This special juggles quite a few things, like SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, the Krusty Krab, and Krabby Patties, as each of these elements are changed during the course of these 22 minutes. And I think that although this episode juggles these topics well, it comes at a cost, as nothing is really given a lot of time, and so we end up seeing characters like Mr. Krabs and Patrick dropped for so much of the episode, and then also the 200th episode of the show not featuring many of the main characters is also a little disappointing, but I think I should tamper my expectations a bit. It's nice that we even got a 200th episode special at all. Next up, it's gonna be The Whole Tooth, which had a score of 7.4 out of 10. Honestly, the fact that this episode managed to be in this tier is pretty remarkable given I don't really care for its plot, both the general strokes of it and also its finer details. I also don't care for the sound of a baby crying that permeates too much in this episode, but what I do enjoy are some of the really good jokes we get, and the unexpectedly captivating chase sequence, and the ending of the episode, and the feeling that SpongeBob and Patrick aren't tolerating Squidward's bullshit in this one. Truly, it's surprising that I enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And then the last episode here in the good tier is gonna be Kenny the Cat, which came in with a score of 7 out of 10. This is a little bit of a bizarre episode when it comes to the randomness of it and the oddness of Kenny the Cat's design. I didn't really like this episode a whole lot, and I was debating on whether I'd put it here in the good tier or in the tier below the okay. What made it land in this one was that there were a couple of good jokes, and I was generally entertained, for the most part, especially when it came to how SpongeBob was written as a little freakishly obsessed dude throughout this episode. But I'm not a big fan of plots like these, where a character is keeping up an obvious lie, but thankfully this episode did not do this trope in its most annoying iteration, where there's secondhand embarrassment all over the place. So that helped things out a lot. 4 episodes were part of the okay tier for season 9. Kicking things off for the green tier here is Sandy's Nutmare, which I'd given a score of 6.9 out of 10. A Sandy-focused episode is always a great thing, but what brings this episode down is the fact that it's got pacing problems, and more importantly, a vaguely offensive character problem. I'm not gonna rehash the half soapbox I went on in my review of this episode, but just know I am not impressed by the shaman character. I wouldn't be impressed if this episode came out 30 years ago, and I'm certainly not impressed now. I did enjoy this episode's message, or warning against the exploitation of nature, but having this vaguely offensive character deliver it is not what I want out of my anthropomorphic sea sponge TV show. The next episode in this tier was also given a score of 6.9 out of 10, and that was Sold. Sorry, my script completely did not have that line, so I'm gonna have to put that in. Anyway, the trouble with this episode is that it started out just fine, calling back, in my mind, to That's No Lady, with Patrick and then SpongeBob being fooled by an advertisement into thinking that their homes have been sold. Squidward taking advantage of this works fine too, but it's when the episode takes a turn into that kind of plot that I don't care for, where a character goes to great lengths to keep up a lie towards other characters, that I get bored and don't really like what I'm seeing all that much. I know the humor was at least supposed to be in these wacky characters Squidward plays, but it just doesn't really work for me. Moving on, we've got Squid Defense, which I'd given a score of 6.8 out of 10. This episode is frankly a bit disappointing because of how much it bungles its setup that had been full of potential. I mean, this could have easily been a Squidward and Sandy focused episode. And while it didn't quite make the same mistakes as the last episode where a random character learned karate star, it certainly did not live up to my expectations for an episode with Squidward and Sandy interactions. In fact, it somewhat incredibly didn't give them any meaningful interactions at all. Also, the message and general topic of this episode make me think too much of real-world problems to really enjoy myself here, though the lack of comedy does that for me too. And then for the last episode of the okay tier, this one was also given a score of 6.8 out of 10, and that was Gary's New Toy. This episode just didn't quite hit the mark for me, and I think that's entirely because it wasn't wild enough. Like, Gary becoming obsessed with this ball should have been played with a whole lot more than it was. Remember how cartoonishly obsessed SpongeBob got with the paddle ball in Have You Seen the Snail? That's what this should have been. And while they got there for like a second with Gary painting his face to look like the ball, it just never quite got to where it needed to be, in my opinion. With these 5 episodes remaining, we reach my bottom 5 of season 9. 3 of these episodes were in my mediocre tier, 1 was in my bad tier, and then 1 was in my abysmal tier. Can you guess which is which? You might be shocked to find that the first of these bottom 5, coming in the mediocre tier, is SpongeBob You're Fired. I'd given this episode a score of 5.9 out of 10. This episode's biggest flaw was its abundance of missed opportunities. It takes far too long for the episode to start being interesting, and in the meantime, all we'd gotten was crying and classist remarks about unemployment. There were good jokes here and there, and this is one of the reasons why this episode is not being placed any lower than it already is, but the feeling I was feeling most frequently while watching this episode was boredom. Yawn. For number 4 of the bottom 5, that's gonna be It Came from Goo Lagoon, which came in with a score of 5.8 out of 10. This episode had the double misfortune of being both subpar as an episode and reminding me too much of my favorite new phrase, real world problems, largely how frustrated I am about people's lack of caution regarding COVID and lack of care regarding AI. Watch the review if you want to hear my rant about that. But yeah, this episode just really missed the mark when it came to being entertaining. It wasn't engaging and was pretty dull for most of it. It had its good moments, but there were hardly enough of those for me to say I really liked what I was watching. And then for number 3 of the bottom 5, as well as the last mediocre tier episode, that's gonna be Salsa Imbecilicus. Yeah, I know that title. This is the lowest rated episode of Season 9B, which I'd given a score of 5.7 out of 10. This episode already annoyed me with its title that is hard to pronounce and spell, but that's not the reason why it's so low, being the lowest rated episode of Season 9B. No, what makes this episode earn this rating is that it's fucking boring as shit, and is actively unpleasant at times with everyone acting so dense and clueless. I also had quite the soapbox to go on regarding this very thing that also soured this episode a bit in my mind, but if you want to know more about that, I encourage you to just watch the corresponding review, because I'm not getting into it here. Next up, we're gonna skip over the tolerable tier and go straight to the bad tier, where Squid Baby lives. As I gave it a score of 3.5 out of 10. This episode has a weird-ass plot that makes me uncomfortable straight up. It's not funny, it's got too much head trauma for a character that's supposed to be a baby, and it's not a ripoff of Rockabye Bivalve either, but if I wanted to see SpongeBob and Patrick have a hard time being parents, I'd just watch that episode instead of seeing them take care of their adult neighbor. I suppose I could give the episode props for leaning on both the child and adult sides of the line, but I don't want to. And now, for my number 1 worst episode of Season 9, my least favorite episode of the season, that's gonna be Little Yellow Book, which I'd given a score of 2.7 out of 10. Meaning it's right here in the Abysmal tier, my worst tier. I've got 5 words for this episode. Secondhand embarrassment is not cute. God, this episode pissed me off real bad. Little Yellow Book is quite possibly Squidward's worst showing ever in this show. Like, the wickedness, the mean-spiritedness, it was just really hard to watch. And this episode had undone so much of the rehabilitative work for Patrick that the previous season and early part of this season had undergone. Thankfully, Season 9B fixed all that, as I'd mentioned in a few of these little blurbs about the episodes, but God, at the time, it was dire. This episode is an immensely frustrating watch that just pisses me off more than it really should, because at the end of the day, this is a children's show. And that's that. What do y'all think of this tier list here? Anything you agree with, disagree with, any surprises, disappointments? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And so now, I think it's about time to switch on over to the more retrospective angle of this video, starting with my average episode rating for this season. So, I'm sure you might be wondering, especially with all of those damn amazing tier episodes, what was the average episode rating for Season 9? Well, it was an 8.2. That is pretty damn good. This is the highest episode rating we've had since the first 3 seasons. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that Season 9 automatically is one of my favorite seasons or anything like that. That's not the point of this average episode rating, since my ratings for episodes tend to be relevant within a season and not as comparable season to season. Doesn't mean I completely changed my rating scale either, but I feel like since I didn't really have a checklist of things that make a certain tier when originally doing these reviews years ago, the numbers end up being just a vibe check of sorts. But anyway, back to the average episode rating at hand. I think what this rating tells us is that this season was pretty damn good. And I think since it is such a departure from the last few seasons, it indicates that this season is doing something differently from the seasons that came before. And that something is what I'll be discussing quite a bit. Well, right about now, I suppose. Let me go ahead and switch these graphics. Alright, it's the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to take some time to talk about Season 9 as a whole. I think there's a lot to chew on here, but I guess the best place to start is the elephant in the room, right? And that elephant is, of course, the stark difference between the first half of Season 9, Season 9A, and the second half of Season 9, Season 9B. This is something I discussed at length in my review of Sponge Out of Water, particularly coming from the angle of how that movie specifically is kind of the impetus of the change between season 9A and 9B, so I'd suggest checking out that video if you're curious to hear more about that. As for this overview, I'm going to spend more time evaluating the difference between 9A and 9B. They're different, for sure. But are they as different as people make it seem? Season 9A is typically lumped into the Season 6 through 8 categorization, which isn't quite a categorization I agree with. To be fair, I do think that Season 9A, the way it was going to be around Season 8 in quality. Season 9B, on the other hand, is frequently regarded as the show's renaissance. Other frequent comments about this half season are that the animation is more bright and fluid, the writing is better, it's more exploratory, etc. These latter comments are the ones I want to evaluate. I mean, I don't think I can argue that the animation of Season 9B is not different than 9A. It absolutely is more expressive, and there's a lot more attentiveness given to the visuals of the show in general in Season 9B. Not just with the animations, but also the general set design as well. How about the writing? I think this is where the qualities that are different about Season 9B are conflated with the ones that aren't so much, because I don't really think the writing is all that different. Yes, Season 9B had more amazing tier episodes, but I don't think that's exactly indicative of the writing being of better quality, and more that the writing is, refreshed, if that makes sense. I mean, I did peep a few new writers this season, but also just the kinds of plots we got and the characters focused on and all that was given a bit of a boost. So I think that's the primary difference as far as the writing is concerned, and that really has more to do with the exploratory nature of Season 9B compared to Season 9A. Season 9A did have a bit of that venturing out into new territory going on, such as with Plankton's Pet, but Season 9B is where that exploration really took off, as the art book itself very clearly states, which I discussed in my review of Sponge Out of Water. So I believe that Season 9A and Season 9B are largely separated by a sense of experimentation, an element that influenced 9B's visuals, writing, and general, well, everything. With that little excursion out of the way, I'm going to go back to discussing Season 9 as a whole, because while pointing out the differences between 9A and 9B is important, Season 9 still is a whole season for a reason, and so I should be discussing it as such. As a whole, I regard Season 9 very similarly to Season 4, not just because of the position it occupies as a transition season, but also quality-wise. Why is this? Well, Season 9 does a lot of things right. For starters, Season 9 welcomes the return of certain character fundamentals. For Patrick especially, this is important because I'm finding myself starting to like his character again, rather than feel neutral or even negative about it. Yes, there was a misstep early on with Little Yellow Book, but the executive treatment, What's Eating Patrick, and Patrick the Game are some of the best Patrick appearances I've seen in a long while. It makes me really happy to see his character being treated right again. Patrick's not the only character to get this treatment, though. Mr. Krabs also sees some important character moments, giving him a little bit of heart again in Tudor Sauce, Pull Up a Barrel, and even Mutiny on the Krusty. Another thing that Season 9 does right, that I've mentioned already, and this is also shared with Season 8, is that it has a sense of adventure when it comes to plots. And I think this coincides nicely with my next point, which is that I think Season 9 gave a lot of focus to making the episodes all around entertaining, rather than providing laughs every second. I think that's the reason why the plots in this season are so interesting to me, and very few episodes are boring. It almost feels like Season 1, except not even that season put as much attention into the plots like this. Additionally, Season 9 started giving focus to characters that don't get as much, like Pearl, Larry, and even Bubble Bass. It's great to see, and something that will continue to happen as these episodes go on. It just makes things a lot more interesting, and keeps the show from growing stale. In terms of the quality of the episodes this season, the first third of the season was very much a mixed bag. We've got a few amazing, mediocre, great, even Abysmal makes an appearance. The last 2/3 of the season, however, are a meteoric rise. At least, it is at first. I'd say the second third of this season is fantastic, for sure up there with the highs of the first 3 seasons, but the last third, well, something was running out of steam. Tiers other than amazing and great started being spotted, even with my optimistic and generous scoring. I wonder what this means for Season 10. Hopefully nothing bad. And now, to close out this overview, I of course have to do one last thing. I gotta name the season. For once, I found naming this season to be very easy, because what else could I call season 9 but the Boomerang season? Why do I call it that? Well, do you guys remember the Boomerang TV channel? And do you remember its little slogan, Boomerang, it's all coming back to you? Not only was that brilliant branding, but it's perfect for this season as well, because it's true. Season 9 is all about coming back to something. The feelings of previous seasons, while being something new, come back, old characters come back, old OSTs come back, etc. Hell, this season even starts getting heavy on the Easter eggs, which is a very Boomerang thing to do. And even talking about the impact of this season, Season 9B in particular did a lot of work at bringing back those who had been known as modern SpongeBob haters, though now the dynamic has changed in the 7 to 10 years since this season premiered, but that's a topic for another time. This season is also one of the most nostalgic for me, given that I was there and cognizant when it premiered, and so it means a lot to me. So it reminds me of Boomerang, the channel, in that way too. It may not be this show's best, but I think that Season 9 should absolutely be considered up there with the likes of Season 1 and 3 as one of the most special, iconic, and era-defining seasons of this show. Perhaps that's unpopular, but I don't really care. As always, I gotta end my video of closing thoughts on a season with some closing thoughts. Man, Season 9 in the books. I can hardly believe it. Can't believe that we're hitting the double-digit seasons now, like this is actually ridiculous. Like, I don't know. When I started doing reviews on this channel, I used to think about what it would be like to do these far-out seasons, and now that I'm here, it's kind of really surreal. Like, oh, I'm more than halfway through this show now. That's amazing. And it's really because of the consistent support that I get here. Yeah, I do this for my own benefit, but I think it wouldn't be such a priority if I didn't have the amazing audience that I do, so seriously, thank you all for sticking with the channel. Especially because doing these reviews continues to be difficult. My routine is basically set now, but I typically work more than 40 hours a week, so squeezing in review time in the middle of my other interests and hobbies is a bit of a hassle, but it's not a hassle I'm necessarily mad about. And as I've been saying for the past month, I've got my reviews of Season 15 to work on for the forum. I have, in fact, been working on them. I've watched the whole season, and I've currently got 7 reviews written out of 26. Yeah, I know I'm going slow, but it's hard. But that is also why I'm taking a tiny break after this video comes out. Not a long one, I'm thinking just a couple weeks, but I'm hoping I can use that time to dig deep into getting these freaking reviews written and out of the way so I can get back to the YouTube reviews. Y'all already know what it is. Keep your eyes peeled on the community tab. I'll make a post once I'm back in action, but expect mid-June for the start of Season 10. And yeah, I guess that's it. I've already said everything I need to say about Season 9 specifically, and anything I did leave out is better left for the Season 10 overview, so you've got a few months to wait for that. But I might mention a couple things here and there, just remembering the topics I discussed throughout my episode reviews of Season 10 when I wrote them a few years ago. God, where's the time gone? Alright, well, before I get into a crisis about time, I think it's about time to say see ya, as I'm gonna close things out here, and I'll see y'all in the next review where I'll begin our foray into Season 10.